Okay everyone, so now in this next lesson, let's go and try to work on our button sign in element here that has the button submit, so at least we can go and adjust some of the stylings that we have for our button here. Now what I would want to do here is to go to our class here and give it a border radius of 5%, a padding inside of the element of 5 pixels, and a margin of 10 pixels first. Let's see how that will look on our browser. Okay, so going back to our code editor here, I'm going to give it a little bit of width of 40%. Let's say 40% first, then color white, and let's also use a background color of RGB 1684 to 11. Now let's try to go and refresh our browser here, and we can see that it increased the size of our button. Let me just go back to our code editor here, and I think I made a mistake here with the spelling of background, so let me go back here, and there we go. So we now have our submit button here. Now what I want to play around with here first will be, again, we'll be working with pseudo classes for our link here. We've done this before, and this will just be a review for you guys, and I just want to specify some things here. And I want you to take note of some things about pseudo classes. And as we all know that pseudo classes are used for defining a special state of an element. So let's say it can be used to style an element when a user mouses over it, when the style that we implement for when the element has already been visited or unvisited. So we can style it differently for visited links and unvisited links. So we can also give it focus. So just one keynote that we should be taking note here would be for us to follow the following acronym, and that's LVHA. So just take note of this, everyone. So this should be the flow on using the pseudo classes for links. So we have here the unvisited link, visited link, the mouse over link, and the selected link. So we've used the active pseudo class before, and now let's go and try to use just follow this flow from where you first specify the unvisited link, then the visited link, then the mouse over link, and the selected link. Last time we only used the mouse over link and then the selected link in our sign up buttons here, right? In our hover state. Then once we try to click on it, that's the active state, right? One thing that you would notice, I had to use this go back one page button here in our browser for me to go back to our sign in page here, or to our index.html, and we don't want that. So instead of having to click on this button, we can go and put here some element or entity that we can use, or a link anchor element that will be connected to our index.html. So one of the things that I would want to share to you guys with regards to this will be the use of HTML entities. Again, we have already tackled this before. I already opened up here the HTML5 entity, and under the alphabetical order here for the entity name, if we try to look for the times here, we can use this. And I actually did a research about the benefits or why this is preferred by most developers. I actually found two good resources here that you might want to go and read. So you would see here that this is going to be useful especially for accessibility purposes for visually impaired users. So we can create close feature from where the box that we have will be closed using the times entity that will not be read as a simple multiplication for accessibility technology or assistive technologies. So it's also important that you maximize the use of an aerial or area label. I've actually found here some discussion here. Area label attribute is used to communicate the label to screen reader users. Usually search input field does not have visual labels thanks to designers. Area label can be used to communicate the label of control to screen readers and users. So there are some ways that some of the developers are giving as a tip here. So I would really suggest that you go through the discussions here. And if you're having a difficult time, again, try to research it and look at the documentation. So let's say we have here the area label attribute used to define a string that labels the current element. Use it in cases where text label is not visible on the screen. If there is visible text labeling the element, use area labeled by instead. So there are some options that you have here. So I won't be going through too much of the documentation here. So I would suggest that you go through and read about the use of the area label here. So for now, let's go and create a link here that we will be using for closing our sign in page here. And we will be using the HTML entity instead of the letter X. Okay, so let's go to our code editor here and let's go create that link inside of our div container here. And let me just put that here, and I'm going to name it button sign in close because this will be used for us to be able to, and I'm going to use the index.html, and we will use the HTML entity times for this. So if we try to go back to our browser, let's go back to our browser here. Let me just close all of this. But don't worry, I'm going to be having a link of all of the things that we have here in our resources. So you can do further reading with the documentation, in the documentation. So let's go and refresh this. And you would see now that we have the HTML entity here, but we want to position it here on this side. Okay, so let's go back to our code editor and check how we can go and do this. So let's also go use an area label here that says that we want this to close sign in form, and go here, and I want to target the button sign in close selector that we have made, and I would want to go and also target the unvisited link and the button sign in closed visited pseudo class. So I would want the styling to be the same for both of the pseudo classes that we have here, and I want to position this absolute. Top will be at least, let's say, 1 pixels first, then left, let's have 90% and see how that will look. Then let's give a font size of 1.5 rem and text decoration for the link that we have as none, and we want it to be display inline block, and we want to have a transition all of around 2.2 seconds here. So let's go and check first how that will look on our browser, and there we go. We now have our element here with the link state with the color white, and positioned absolutely here. Let me just move this a little bit more here. Let's say negative 1 pixels here. And let's go increase this for at least 93%. Let's refresh that, and there we go. So that will be our position here. Now what I want to do next here is to change the color of the button once we try to hover on top of it. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go and use the hover mouse over link here. And if you remember, we can do that by using the hover pseudo class. So button sign in closed hover, and we want this to be color red, and that's the reason why we have the transition all 0.2 seconds here. So let's see how that will look, and there we go. We now have the hover state, and it's turning our closed HTML entity here inside of the anchor element into red. And once we click on that, it redirects us to our index.html. So we now have a way for us to be able to close our sign-in form here. Now that will be all for this lesson, and I hope you learned a lot of techniques and you gathered a lot of information and resources for this lesson. So thank you everyone, and see you on our next lesson.